All right, I think we'll jump right into it. So we have 6 species of owls that are known to breed within the state. There are 5 other species that are rarely observed here, or regularly observed here, depending on the species, in different periods of the year, but aren't known to breed here. There are a few species that are more common and pretty familiar, others that are highly secretive. So we'll go through and talk about each one. So, of course, first, great horned owl, probably one of the most familiar species out there. Very large owl, very widespread throughout the state and throughout the country, and they're one of our earliest breeding birds. They actually are, I think the safe, oh yeah, the safety is right there. So they start breeding in January, so right in the heart of winter. They reuse the nests of other birds, crows, ravens, herons, and they'll nest in the crotches of trees. They're found in a wide variety of habitats throughout their range, but here in Maine, they're especially associated with sites with lots of tree cover, but also lots of open area for them to forage. And they tend to be most active, at least vocally, about an hour after sunset or an hour before dawn. Their vocalizations, that sort of like classic owl call that you hear in movies. They're low, very resonant hoots, and they can also be performed as duets between pairs. And within those duets, the females' vocal quality is a little bit higher than the males. But that's not all they do. They also can make really harsh, like scream-like calls when they're defending their nests. It's pretty intense sounding. So let's take a listen here. Here's the primary song of the great horned owl. And now I'll play for you the duet. Female, a little bit higher. Hey Glenn, would you mind unmuting real quick and letting me know if did that audio come through okay?
Yeah, it came through fine.
Okay, great. Okay, just wanted to make sure before I dive in. All right, so they these owls remain on their breeding territories year round. They're one of the easier species to confirm in Maine. There's no species, I guess, is really truly easy when it comes to owls, but they're one of the easier ones because their nests are often pretty conspicuous. They nest in really prominent, high places, and because they start breeding so early, they're usually on the nest long before there are any leaves to obscure. And their young also are highly visible. They do this thing called branching, which is they hang out kind of in the proximity of the nest site, and will cling to tree branches as they're starting to mature and are still being cared for by the adults. So the next owl here is the barred owl. It's another fairly widespread and common species here in Maine. They're a very loud species, and they have a really impressive vocal repertoire. They can make all sorts of wild sounds. They generally nest in tree cavities or sometimes in they'll reuse nests from other species, or they can nest in specialized nest boxes. They have to be fairly large. They're found in a variety of different forest types, generally near water, so riparian areas near rivers or near wetland areas. But young birds, also similar to the great horn, the young birds can be fairly visible. They'll hang out on tree branches. Their most common vocalization is often depicted as "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" It can be heard year round, but generally peaks within the breeding season. So I'll play that for you. So that's one I've been hearing around my house a lot lately. They also will perform duets, where they duet seems like too poetic a word for it, but it's called caterwauling, which is often described as sounding sort of monkey-like. And Doug recently in a presentation said he could see why there was so much folklore about ghosts and things off in the wilderness here when people started setting up here. I'll play that for you. I once had them doing that right over a tent. I was tented out and they were literally right over the tent before. So I didn't sleep a lot that night, but it was pretty cool. All right. So our next owl is the northern saw-whet owl, another species that's fairly widespread, though not seen quite as often as the other two. It's a very small owl. They'll use a variety of different forest types, but they are usually in near coniferous forest, again, particularly near water. They breed throughout the entirety of the state. They are said to be especially numerous out down east. They'll nest in tree cavities, primarily the cavities made by woodpeckers. They'll also nest in man-made nest boxes, and a large number will migrate through the state in the fall, but there are year-round saw-whets that can be found. Also, they're fairly early breeders. Many of them are already staking out, breeding territories and nest sites right now. During the day, they'll often roost in conifers and usually right near the ground. And if you happen upon one, they'll often just kind of perch there, and they're highly visible. But they usually rely on the conifers to kind of blend into. But they are often mobbed by by songbirds when they're found. They advertise their territories with a string of high-pitched monotonous notes that earned them their name. It's said to sound like a saw being sharpened, but they also can do barks and whines and whistles. And nestlings, when a nest is found, you can sometimes hear them calling from within the nest, and it's got sort of a high-pitched chirp. So we'll start with a song here. So that's their song. And then let's do a call here. They can almost sound cat-like. So they have a range of vocalizations that it's helpful to be familiar with. All right, our next owl is the eastern Screech-Owl. They're generally found only in the southwestern part of the state, primarily down in York County, and they will nest in more developed habitats than many of the other species. They'll nest in backyards and parks, so long as there's adequate cover and hunting ground and a suitable nesting site. They may have bred in larger areas of the state, maybe a little bit further north, but at this point they're primarily found just in southwestern Maine. And like saw-whets, they'll nest in tree cavities, whether that's from a woodpecker or a rotten branch, or they'll also nest in man-made nest boxes. They generally will nest well away from some of the larger owl species. The barred owl and great horned owl will prey upon some of the smaller owl species. There are two different color morphs of the eastern screech-owl. There's the red morph, which you can see in the photo here, and then there's also a gray morph. So they also have a range of different vocalizations. They have a sort of extended trill, monotone trill. That's a contact call. And then they have a whinny call that's for territory defense. I'll play those for you now. So this is the whinny. And now the song. So when they're found, they'll also be mobbed by jays and crows and other passerines. The fledglings do also branch and will stay fairly close together while they're still under the care of the adults. Because the species has such a limited breeding range in the state, this is one of those species that if you come across one, this is one to take a lot of notes on. And as a rule, taking notes and making recordings are definitely encouraged when it comes to owls, but we'll touch on that more later. But should you find a suspected screech owl outside of York County, that's when you really ought to take a lot of notes. And here's another one that you'd want to take a lot of notes on. So long-eared owl is thought to be a widespread species, thought to be throughout the state, but very, very poorly understood, not very well documented. Highly secretive, silent through much of the year, but they do get quite vocal in the breeding season. They nest in forest habitat or in forest patches, again, usually near open areas. I think there's only been one long-eared owl that has been confirmed as part of the Maine Bird Atlas, and that was in a small patch of woods right near a grassland area. Their vocalizations can be easily confused with other species. Again, there are a range of different vocalizations that these owls make. They tend to nest in the nests of other species, like crows, but they will occasionally nest in a tree cavity. They typically begin vocalizing after dusk, and the male's vocalization is a pretty simple sounding who call that's repeated with short pauses between each note. So I'll play that for you. So yeah, quite a simple little hoot. The female produces a higher, harsher, and almost kind of buzzy sounding vocalization. And that's been, I've heard it compared to like blowing through a comb, and that kind of seems to work. So I'll play that for you. So yeah, the female sounds like blowing through a comb. The male, they say, sounds like blowing into like an empty jug or an empty bottle. But they also make a number of different vocalizations. They will make, bark-like calls and sort of cat-like mew calls when they're agitated or alarmed. Like I said, though this one is thought to be pretty widespread here in Maine, it's very poorly documented. So this is another one that if you come across a long-eared owl, you'd want to take a lot of notes, take some recordings if you think you're hearing one. But we'll talk about some of those best practices. All right, our next owl is the short-eared owl. These owls tend to nest later in the season than a lot of the other species. They are somewhat unique among our native owls in that they are generally active, either in the non-breeding season, they're active at dawn and dusk, or through the breeding season, they can be active right through the day. And actually, we've got quite a few of these owls around right now that are in open areas. This is another fairly rare breeder within the state. They are thought to be breeding on grasslands and open areas in northern and eastern Maine, but again, very, very few records. They generally aren't coming up in grassland bird surveys. Through the winter, it's not uncommon to find them along the coast and on near airports, blueberry barrens, other really open spaces where they forage. Their flight is kind of unique in that it's very floppy and bouncy, and it's often described as moth-like. It's very fluttery. It's sort of a good contrast to harriers, northern harriers, which share a lot of share those habitats and tend to glide around and have really heavy beats. So they're not especially vocal. They do have a courtship vocalization that I'll play for you. It sort of sounds like repeated whoos. And they also call, and their call is a very harsh, sort of bark-like call. So in our special category, the Boreal Owl. So this is a species that's a known winter visitor, a rare winter visitor, and how rare it is sort of hard to know because they're incredibly secretive. They don't vocalize through the winter. And it's speculated that they could potentially breed. There's certainly habitat, and their breeding range does sort of a loop right over Maine. They breed in Quebec and in the Maritimes. And recently, I think it was 2001, I believe, there was a confirmed Boreal owl breeding in New Hampshire. They nest in spruce fir or mixed coniferous forests, primarily using tree cavities like some of the other small species. They'll also use nest boxes, and there are lots of nest box programs in areas where these species are a little bit more common. They have their primary vocalization is a very loud trill with brief pauses between. The duration of their singing period can be quite variable. They can sing for just a few minutes, or they could sing for a couple hours. So their vocalization has been compared to, or is often confused for rather, the winnowing sound of a Wilson snipe. So I'll play both of those for you, but I'll start with the Boreal Owl. And now I'll play the winnow, which is a mechanical wing noise actually of the Wilson snipe, which is a shorebird that breeds throughout the state. So the individual portions of the Boreal Owl's song, they have a much more abrupt ending than the winnow, which kind of gradually tapers off. So I'll play that for you again. It just stops right there. Whereas the winnow, you'll hear that fades out. And I've heard winnowing at a distance, and it does sound fairly similar. Especially, it sounds much harsher up close. But again, a good example of why it's important to take recordings and take lots of notes and spend a good amount of time knowing what you're seeing and hearing. Because of this species rarity, if its secrecy, it would be this is like the highest priority in terms of taking down ample nodes. There's no breeding records in the state up to this point. So I think I heard there's some free binoculars in the mix if you somehow come up with the confirmed Boreal Owl. All right, so there are a number of other species that can be found here throughout the winter. The snowy owl is a fairly regular visitor along the coast and in open areas. Their numbers will fluctuate year to year based on prey, but they're fairly reliable in certain parts of the state through the winter. The northern hawk owl and the great gray owl are rare visitors through the winter. Again, they're driven down here by, if there is if there's a shortage of prey on their typical wintering grounds, they'll depart and come down, and every couple of years turn up here. Then there's the barn owl, which is a rare visitor in southern Maine, usually only during migration. Although there was a case where there was an attempted breeding barn owl, but it was not successful in central Maine. All right, so now we'll move over to talk about atlasing specifically. And many of you are probably familiar with this, and for others this might be new, but we'll just go through sort of a general rundown first. It's a multi-year project that consists of both the Maine Bird Atlas, that takes place primarily in the breeding season, and the Maine Winter Bird Atlas. And this is actually the first Maine Winter Bird Atlas that's being conducted. Atlases are usually conducted every 2 to 3 decades and help measure changes in abundance or changes in distribution throughout the state. And this is it's our second breeding bird atlas. The first one was run in 1978 and ran until 1983. Participating in the atlas is open to birders of all skill levels. So whether you've been birding for decades or you just started to observe the birds in your backyard, everyone is welcome to take part and submit records of the birds that they're seeing. In the breeding season, we're looking for observations of breeding behavior. So we know about if a species is a possible breeder, a probable breeder, or confirmed. So I'll refer to that a little bit throughout. So volunteers can make just observations in their own backyards, or they can adopt atlas blocks and go out and complete blocks. So within the Maine Bird Atlas, there's a number of special species surveys that I referred to earlier. There is the Owl Monitoring Project, the Adopt-a-marsh program, Nightjar Monitoring Project, and then we have a Nest Box Monitoring Project with a number of different species that we're targeting, including owls. These are projects that are designed to target species that are generally secretive or are active in periods when most of us are asleep and not out birding. So they require a little extra effort and extra planning. The Nest Box projects are pretty interesting because they provide an opportunity for we can both provide suitable nesting sites and have the added benefit of confirming breeding for some of these species, which some of them are tougher to confirm. And we have some upcoming presentations on the Adopt-a-marsh project, and Nightjar is coming soon. I'll have those details at the end. So atlasing for owls, it can be a challenge, but I think it's a fun challenge. It's a different type of birding. Confirming most of the species in the state is a tall order, but there are some species that are easier to confirm. And so there's a emphasis on raising our surety that owls breed from possibly breeding to probably breeding. And we do that primarily by going out and listening for these birds, because while they're hard to find a lot of the time, they're fairly vocal, especially through the breeding season. So this is an instance where sharpening your skills in birding by ear can be really helpful, because oftentimes you're out in the dark listening for these. And as I mentioned, taking notes, super important, especially when you're in doubt, and making recordings. And making recordings doesn't have to be anything terribly complicated. Just using your cell phone, the recording app that probably came preloaded on your phone is likely totally up to the task for getting recordings. And that's just because these species can be so easy to confuse with other owls or other birds or other animals. So it can be helpful for us to go back and consult that. And when taking notes, you really just try to do your best to describe what it is you're seeing or hearing to the best of your abilities. So as far as when to atlas for owls, actually some of your owl targeted atlasing can be done during the day. There's certain species that would work better for. But as far as going out and listening for owls, night tends to be ideal. And going out on a calm evening or night is great. That's when the owls are easiest to hear and are most likely to be vocalizing. And going out when there's low wind, no rain, or snow, maybe it's not too late. And going out and trying different times of the night to listen for different species. Some may be more active in your area at a different time. So yeah, like I said, some species can be pretty easy to confirm. Great horned owl, for instance, this is a nest. It's actually a heron nest that is being used by great horned owls, 2 owlets there. So looking for occupied nests, it takes some practice, and you got to know where to look. But if you know of large nests that are out there, of a crow nest that was nearby, you could go and check that out. So because our native owls don't generally build their own nests, like I pointed out, they're usually reusing a nest or reusing a nest cavity. We're not seeing things like them flying with nest materials, or they're not out hammering on a tree trying to excavate a nesting cavity. So those are things that we often can use to confirm other species. So you got to be a little bit more creative and go out and know what to look for. So one of the things you can do is you can go out and look for other birds and see what they're doing, and you can consult the mob, so to speak. So that just means going out and looking for the chickadees you hear sometimes getting really fired up. Oftentimes, chickadees and other mixed songbird flocks will find predators, whether they're hawks or owls, and basically just harass them and try to get them out of the area. So if you hear these chickadees going off, that's a good thing to look for, or other species. I mean, there are lots of species that will mob a predator. So crows also will do this, and of course crows are very, very loud, so you can hear them doing this from a distance. And I've found owls before by going and beelining it towards where all the crows are fired up. And crows will often give chase, so sometimes they'll actually, the owl will give up and take off and fly, and you'll see the crows going after them. But that's if you're looking just to see if you have owls in the area, that's one daytime skill that can be fairly useful. And while you're out there, there are several other species of birds, particularly if you're out at night. There are a good handful of birds that you should become familiar with. There's the American woodcock, which has a really elaborate flight courtship display, and has a little nasally peent call that they do when they're on the breeding grounds. Eastern whippoorwill and common nighthawk are 2 nightjars that breed within the state, and both are fairly vocal, especially the whippoorwill, which will sing for long strings of time. In the evening, if you're out looking in the evening, there are tons of different species of thrush and chimney swifts and many other species that are out there. So while you're out there, if you're out there atlasing for owls and you hear other species that you recognize, you definitely want to share those observations as well. And it could be familiar, useful to know these species just so you can separate them from potential owls. Then there are a number of other animals that are out and active at night. There are lots of different insects, like this katydid here, that are produce really loud, different loud sounds. Coyotes, individuals, pairs, and families, they'll all vocalize, and they have a really wide range of vocalizations that they do that can sound really quite strange. And then there are a number of different frog species that are also vocal at night through the breeding season. So won't be long before we start hearing spring peepers here, and probably they're already sounding off somewhere. But good to be familiar with frogs. American toad is another one to be really familiar with, because they have their vocalization is also this long drawn out trill. So we've got a couple of different trilling owl species. So it's a good one to know. Foxes are another species that's quite vocal. They bark and whine, but the one to really be listening for, just so it just doesn't, give you a fright, is they'll do a vixen call or a vixen scream. And it's just a really terrible scream-like call that carries over long distances. So I've been out and doing surveys and had that right behind me, and it sounds pretty horrible. But also barking dogs and cats, yowling cats are another good thing to make sure you're not hearing, because a dog barking off in the distance can sound a little bit like a great horned owl or another owl with a low resonant call. And I mentioned that a bunch of these owl species make sort of cat-like mewing sounds. So when in doubt, if you hear something strange and you don't recognize it, record it. There's lots of people that would be interested in helping you figure out what it is that you're hearing. So one of the specialized projects that we have, this is a step beyond atlasing, so to speak, is this owl playback survey. It's mainly geared for intermediate volunteers that are really familiar with a lot of these owl species. It targets eastern screech-owl, long-eared owl, northern saw-whet owl, and boreal owl. Essentially, what we're asking people to do is go out go to different areas of habitat within our atlas blocks, or within their own adopted atlas blocks or other blocks, and conduct these surveys. And they're 17 minutes long, so they're not terribly long. And we're asking folks to go out and make repeated surveys throughout the year, just to hopefully pick up some different species. And so playback is interesting. So there are some pros and cons to playback. It's valuable in that owls are really reactive to the vocalizations of other owls, whether it's their own species or another owl species. And so where these might be sitting silently and go undetected, this is a good way of drawing them out. The con here is that playback, it draws owls away from their typical breeding activity, whether that's foraging or patrolling their territory or caring for their young. So we want to be as we don't want to disrupt these owls from their breeding. So because of that, these surveys should be done sparingly, and playback shouldn't be used outside of these surveys. So essentially, if you're out and you wanted to go to different areas within an atlas block, you can do multiple surveys. You just want to make sure you have a good amount of distance between each of your survey sites, and we're saying roughly just over half a mile. So space them out, and don't repeat a playback at the same site. So, or in the same night. So you could go back 7 or more days later and try it again, but you wouldn't want to just do it back to back to back and just keep trying to draw them out or keep hassling the same owl. But essentially what folks are doing, it's pretty darn straightforward. So we would set you up with a MP3 recording, and you'd need a speaker and some way of recording your observations. And you the speaker has the vocalizations of those 4 species I mentioned, and it has spaces of silence between each of those recordings. And so you're playing this recording, this whole string, and hopefully drawing out some of those species while that playback is playing. And there's a listening period on either side. So if they are slow to turn up, you might catch them in your later listening period. All right, so yeah, like I mentioned, you'd want to hit some different habitat types. So you could, if you have a patch of, you know, dense conifers, you could do a survey there, and then you know, go to a wetland site that's nearby. You'd want to return to that site 7 or more days later, and that would give us a sense of whether or not the owl is actually breeding at that site. You know, it's possible that you get one that's just in migration, you get it that one night. But if we can repeatedly get the same species at the same site, there's a good chance that they're probably breeding at that site. And then you'd want to enter your results to the Maine Bird Atlas using eBird. There's a lot, if you're not familiar with that, there's a lot of resources on maine.gov/bird atlas that will help get you started with that if you're unfamiliar with atlasing. And yeah, just a note, don't be discouraged if you go out and you get 0 owls turning up during your survey, because that's just as important to know where these birds are not as it is to know where they are. The data that's collected by this and other surveys is used to inform the management of these species. So we got to know where they are, and that's super helpful. All right. Just a note on safety. So this would apply to atlasing too if you're out at night. You know, this is all pretty common sense stuff, but you'd want to make sure that you're pretty visible, especially since a lot of folks tend to do these surveys along roadways. You know, make sure you've got a vest and a flashlight. Make sure you know, someone knows where you're going. Bring a map, and I always recommend going out and checking you know, a potential site beforehand, because things look so different in the dark. So just go out and scope it out during the day so you know exactly where you're going and what you're getting into. And if you're driving from site to site, you know, soft shoulders are a thing. You don't want to end up, you know, stuck in the mud. So make sure you check out the places you're going to pull off. And you know, you're welcome to bring a partner with you. One person should be doing the actual survey, but you know, if you want a partner to ride along with you, that's not a bad idea. But yeah, and don't be surprised if people stop to ask you what you're doing. That happens all the time, and people are generally pretty friendly about that. So so yeah, just don't be surprised. Most people are just looking to see if they can help you out. All right, so our next project here is the owl nest box monitoring project, and this targets 3 species. So primarily it targets northern saw-whet owl, because like I said, that's our most widespread species in the state. If you're down in York County or perhaps a little beyond, you know, you might get eastern Screech-Owl in one of these boxes. And you know, if you're in suitable habitat, it's possible that you could have a Boreal Owl turn up in a nest box. They do use the same style of nest box. This runs roughly from April to August, so that's just to be within the window for primarily northern saw-whet owl. It's a pretty low-key project, really. So once you've got your box set up and installed in suitable habitat, we're asking people to go out and make observations in the area of that box for just 15 minutes per week at a minimum. And I mean, if you want to spend more time with that, then you're certainly welcome to. You might just hear another species while you're out there. And so that's just in the first part of the period. And you're looking for and listening for different indications that the owls are potentially nesting at this site. In the latter half of the survey period, from May to August, we're asking folks just to do 15 minutes of observation every 2 weeks. And that's basically to give these owls some space during that really sensitive part of the breeding season. But again, you're welcome to spend more time, but you'd want to space it out once we get into that later part of the season. So this project, as I mentioned, with all the nest box projects, provides suitable nesting sites for these owls, and it offers us an opportunity to confirm species for these owls that are a lot tougher to confirm. So, like I said, northern saw-whet owl is quite widespread, but we don't have a lot of confirmation records. So this is one key to maybe netting some more of those. So we have guidance up on our website for making boxes, if that's something that you're interested in. So we ask folks to observe at a distance, but there is some guidance for people who are maybe a little bit more experienced with nest box monitoring that are interested in doing actual nest checks to collect information on breeding success or the number of young. A lot of this can be done at a distance, but there is some pretty interesting information that can be gathered from making nest box checks. All right. So we have a number of boxes that were made available for volunteers that are in suitable habitat that are available first come, first serve. So I think we have 30 boxes on hand that would be suitable for our owls. And then additionally, as I mentioned, we have plans for folks that are, have some carpentry skills and want to put together some boxes. These pictured boxes, we actually built all those in one day. We had a bunch of donated materials and made a little assembly line and made a bunch of those. But these boxes we're getting today were donated to us by Department of Corrections. So thanks to them. If you're interested in one of these boxes or interested in just getting the plans, you can send me an email. Just put the owl nest box in the subject, and like I said, it's a first come, first serve. Ideally, these boxes should be installed by March 15th to be used in the current breeding season, which of course today is the 18th, but it's still totally worth it to, if you do get a box or you build a box, get those boxes set up as soon as possible. It's possible that an owl will renest, start a new brood in one of these boxes, or that they'll scope out this site for next year or the following. And we generally don't expect the boxes to be used in the first season. So it's totally fine if you got a box now and you wanted to set it up. That's still totally worthwhile. And you could be surprised. You never know what we'll end up using one of these boxes. And so we have a manual for doing this project with a ton of information. So if this is something that you're interested in, we can definitely share that with you. So if you want to take part in any of these projects, if you're interested in atlasing in general, I'd recommend you get on Maine.gov and sign up to join the Atlas. There's tons of information on that site for getting started with atlasing, and there's some information on making observations of these special species like owls. If you're interested in the playback surveys, you'd want to send me an email, and I can set you up with all the materials you need to do that. That season is opening fairly soon, so you'd want to do that fairly soon. And if you're interested in the nest box monitoring project, again, yeah, you just want to send me an email, and I'll get you everything that you need for that. Oh, and regarding the nest boxes themselves, we can arrange some sort of meetup and meet in the middle and get you your boxes. Glenn and I are going to go and pick all those up shortly, so he may have some boxes on hand. That might make sense. As I mentioned, there are 2 more presentations like this one that are coming up. We have the Adopt-a-marsh webinar that's coming up on April 15th, same time, 6 o'clock. And we'll be talking about secretive marsh birds, which also require some, very deliberate efforts to find. They can be very difficult to observe. And you can essentially adopt a marsh in the state of Maine and monitor it through the breeding season. And then on May 5th, we'll have a presentation on nightjar monitoring. We have a number of routes throughout the state that volunteers can adopt and monitor through the breeding season. Excuse me. It's generally surveys are done twice through the summer. It's a fairly small commitment, but some folks are willing to take on multiple routes even some years. And so that targets eastern whippoorwill, common nighthawk, and a number of other species that are active at sunset or on moonlit nights. So stay tuned for those. Those are coming right up. And those we'll promote those just as we did with the Owl project. I think tickets are going to be available for those in like a week for the Adopt-a-marsh. Just some additional resources. So as I mentioned numerous times here, we got the Maine Bird Atlas website there, but the Maine Nightjar Monitoring Project site. So that's the project site for the surveys I was just talking about. That site's quite useful for other species as well, because we're also documenting, whatever other birds are out when we're doing our surveys for whippoorwills and nighthawks. And there's a bunch of species profiles on there that have information that is, Atlas specific and Maine and specific to Maine for folks that want to make observations of those species. And there's also some photos, and there are recordings and a quiz if you want to test your skills. So that could be a pretty useful one for owl monitoring. The Maine.gov site also has a page specifically dedicated to special species surveys that would have information on these projects and others, and links to everything you need to get started with these or who to get in contact with. The Nest Box Monitoring Project has on our website on mainenaturalhistory.org, there are a number of materials on there for a number of different species. We actually have some boxes available for tree swallows and bluebirds additionally. So definitely check that out if you're interested in nest box monitoring, whether it be owls or something else. And then just another useful link here, just for if you're looking to hone your bird ID skills, and whether it's visually or by ear, Nature Instruct has a project called Dendrotica that has a number of vocalizations that you can go through and listen to, and a number of photos that you can look through and make comparisons. So that's a pretty useful website for you to check out as well. So that's all I have for the formal presentation. At this point, I'll leave this up. We'll switch over if folks have any questions. You can use the chat. I think Glenn is going to read off questions for me. And there may be some things that I know we have a lot of experienced atlasers and birders here. So I may tag one of you if it's something that I'm not as familiar with.
Yeah, so Glenn Hodgkins has a question about owl nest box monitoring, whether it's a daytime or nighttime thing.
Yeah, you really could. I mean, generally we recommend that folks go out at night because a lot of people were mainly listening for these species. But you could go out and make some checks during the day, and you very well might find some useful information there. I mean, especially later in the breeding season, if you're not making nest box checks, the owlets will come right up to the opening of the box, and you can confirm breeding, from 30 feet away. So it's probably worth it to check them out at different times during the day. But you want to make sure that you're making some, nighttime observations.
Yeah, there's been a discussion in the chat about how to record bird songs on a phone app.
Yep.
And there's some nice suggestions in the chat that folks should check out. But I was wondering, Logan, if there's any that you use in particular, or
yeah, I mean, I use just the actual voice. It's just a voice recorder that came on my phone. I use it all the time, and I think it works brilliantly most of the time. If species is really far away, it has a harder time. But I've got numerous recordings. That's just through it's if you have an iPhone, just voice memos. That's what I used. But I know there are others out there, and yeah, just sometimes whatever you have in your pocket is the best is the best thing to use.
Yeah. And earlier on, there was a question about safe dates, that you'd mentioned safe dates in talking about the owls, and somebody was asking, what does that mean? What is a safe date?
Sure. Yeah. So that's definitely an atlasing term. So the safe dates sort of are the bookends on the general period of that species, a breeding period. So it's the time when we feel comfortable saying that this isn't a migrant, this is a resident bird, most likely. And so we use that for primarily for some of the lower breeding codes. So there's a whole string of different codes that we use to define breeding behavior. And some of the lower ones are singing bird, and another one is bird in suitable habitat, so an S or an H. And the safe dates really are useful when you're using those codes. So if you hear, like I have red poles right now at my house that have just started singing, and they're out of suitable habitat, and they're out of their safe dates. So these are migrants. These are wintering birds that are going to move on. And so that's what we use the safe dates for. And on the flip side, if you see a indication that a bird is breeding outside of the safe dates, well, that's very useful information. And if you saw a crow flying with a stick, then there's well before the safe dates, it's a good chance that crow is carrying that to a nesting site to build a nest. So so then you can still you can report breeding behavior outside of the safe dates.
Yeah, so Michael Boardman has a question about, he volunteers for Avian Haven, and they get breeding barred owl records in the spring. People, injuries or whatever. But he's just wondering if those should get recorded in the Maine Bird Atlas. And if they're, can that be done if they're from last year, records from last year?
That's a good question. I mean, you can definitely put in historic records if you know exactly where they were. That's helpful. As far as should those, let's see, let me make sure I understand the question exactly.
Yeah, well, I can chime in on that as well.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, I think the thing that we need to know is the location and the date. And if you can figure those out fairly easily, definitely I'd say enter those into the Maine Bird Atlas. Um, it, it's all good information. The
Okay.
Maine Bird Atlas, we're trying to figure out all the breeding birds, the distribution of each breeding species from 2018 to 2022.
Yeah.
So if you're just hearing about the Maine Bird Atlas from now, and you know of some breeding records that have happened in the past, those can all get entered in.
Yeah, definitely.
So Lori Brown has a question about, sounds like she's new to thinking about owls or owling, but wondering how many species of owls could there be on her 30 acres of land?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a
Or
good
area.
question. Yeah, I guess it would depend somewhat on the habitat and the species. I know so some of the smaller owls tend to avoid the areas where there are larger species, but I think they would still be within a 30-acre area potentially. Um, yeah, I haven't found a lot of species in close proximity, a lot of owl species in close proximity. But I wonder if there are any other atlasers and birders out there that have seen that. I know Lance Benner has done a lot of owl atlasing.
Yeah, hi, this is Lance.
Lance.
Um, yeah, well, certainly here in California, we quite often find some of the small owls fairly close to each other. Um, Northern saw-whet owls and western screech owls, for example, often are, within 100 or 200 meters of each other. So that would include one of the species that you have in Maine. Um, in terms of great horns and barred, you'd know better than I would. I don't have enough experience in Maine to really answer that.
Yeah.
So if you're lucky enough to find an eastern screech owl nest, I wouldn't be surprised if there are saw-whets in the same area.
Mm. Yeah, right. Yeah, that seems very plausible. I know there are quite a few confirmed saw-whets down in southern Maine, so it's very possible they're both there.
So there's a couple more questions.
Yeah.
One from Pat, who's sounds like she's participated in the previous owl monitoring project in Maine that must have run from 2003 to 2013. And her question is about, I think their question is about, did that data ever get recorded and used? And I actually have a little information on that. It's the reports on that. They have done the analysis and got some publications out of that data. And that group advised us on our setting up these protocols. So that data has already been very helpful for the Maine Bird Atlas. But Bob Brooks has a question. He says he knows there are barred owls on his property. How does he find the nest?
Yeah, that can definitely be a challenge. So if you know of existing nests that are out there, it's possible that you could track those down. Another thing to look for, because they do sometimes nest in tree cavities, is to look for fairly large mature trees that are already because they're a larger owl, they would need a larger cavity. So look for places where limbs have broken off of trees and left sort of a, a little, bowl, like, essentially. They can sometimes be seen there. Another thing with barred owls, like I said, because they can be fairly visible after they fledge, is to start to look for them, a little bit later in the season. And I've found quite a few, downy looking young barred owls that way. And they're oftentimes there's a few right close together. And so your chances go up. The young barred owls make a really sort of like a really screechy call that also can be used for confirming that species if you can't find a nest. And I've heard that call fairly reliably throughout my atlasing efforts just by being out. And you can hear that day or night. I've heard it first thing in the morning, and I've heard it out while doing nightjar surveys. So that's one to be familiar with. Let's see, I think I actually have it. Yeah, I do have a recording of that. I'll play it for you. So this is the juvenile call. And I think it was Doug who pointed this out in a presentation recently. That's one that often gets confused for barn owl. They also have a really screech-like call. So that's another one you want to really become familiar with. I see a question on, do owls return to the same nests? That's a good question. I don't know. It would probably depend on the species. I know a lot of them by the end of the season, because especially where they're with larger owls that are reusing the nests of other species, they'll start to degrade, but and essentially be gone at the end of the breeding season. But if it's a larger nest, seems plausible to me that they could reuse a site. As for the cavity nesters, that's a good question. I suspect, again, it seems possible that they would reuse the same site if they had breeding success. A lot of the cavity nesting species will return, just in general, will return if they've been successful at a site. So. Yeah, will there be any dedicated boreal owl surveys a few hundred feet below the tree line in the Western Mountains? Yeah, that's probably the best place to look. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, especially in preparing for this presentation, because they can be found in montane habitats, especially out west. Seems possible that they could be in those areas of suitable habitat here. I don't know if there will be a dedicated survey effort, but I'd be interested in one. I know that I'm going out and doing alpine surveys again this year, and I know that that's specifically something that I was hoping to do, is go out and maybe camp deeper in the montane habitat and further from the tree line. Yeah, and Lance pointed out the Boreal Owl family, the confirmed Boreal Owls that I mentioned that were in New Hampshire. That was at a montane site in the Presidential Range. All right. Okay, Lori says, since I am new, what is a good resource for me to learn about owls as well as share the info before I am up to the level of the Bird Atlas? I have a lot of owls here. So those websites that I mentioned could be useful to you. The Maine Nightjar monitoring website, you can go on and there's a there's a tab that it's you know, the birds we study, owls are on there. You can go through and all of the likely species are listed with you know, descriptions, photos, recordings, and then if you want to test yourself, you can do a little. There's a quiz where you go on and you just play the recording and you try to recognize the species. And you know, on top of that, you know, it's always good to get out and actually try to practice in the field. So, you know, get familiar with some of these owls and, you know, go out and see if you can recognize them and, you know, make recordings and compare those recordings to the, you know, the resources online. You know, if you have questions, you could always talk to, you know, the Atlas staff. There's a lot of people that could help you. All right, let's see if there are any other questions here. Yeah, there was a question about how do I record on eBird, and Jeff pointed out that there are pages with instructions on how to upload things to eBird. If you're unfamiliar with eBird, there's a phone app that you can use for logging your observations. You can also log them on a desktop computer. You can just do it through their website. But yeah, there are a lot of good resources, and there are you know, the Maine Bird Atlas has a resources page that you can go on, and I think there are a couple of videos demonstrating how to set your account up for making observations for the Atlas through eBird, and yeah, there should be quite a good amount of info out there. I think that's all I see for questions. Let's see. Yeah, Lance has a good point. So if you're recording on a smartphone and you don't know how to transfer those recordings to a computer, ask for help. Definitely, we can help make that happen because it does depend on the app that you're using. But there are a number of ways to get that recording off of your phone and into the database. All right, I think we are at the end of our questions here. So I would just kind of wrap up by saying thank you guys for joining us and for participating in the presentation today. I hope that this has inspired you to get out and get to know your local owls, or you know, if you're enterprising, you know, go out and check out a remote area for owls. If you need anything, if you need any of these resources that I mentioned, you can certainly email me, and I will make sure that you get the proper paperwork that you need. And if you are interested in those nest boxes, you know, just let me know, because I think they'll go quick once we start advertising that we have them. So, all right, I think we will wrap up here. Oh, well, I have a quick question. Okay, are you predetermining owl playback survey routes, or people encouraged to create their own? This is, in this case, you're creating your own. So if you know of a suitable site, go and check those out. All right, thank you guys. Appreciate it.